We are at the Mishnah Daf Samach Aleph and Bet, and by the way, this is being recorded. So, says the Mishnah, the bottom of Samach Aleph, Lo Yivatel Adam Mipir Yav Rivya. A person should not stop from fulfilling the mitzvah of having children, Elim Ken Yesh Lo Banim, unless they already have children. Beit Shammai Omrim Shnei Zecharim. That means if they have two male children, we call those sons. Beit Hillel Omrim Zechar Nekiva. Hillel says two children, but one male, one female. Again, it's not so clear yet, and it won't be clear later either, whether he means or, meaning or two sons or a son and a daughter, but presumably, specifically a son or a daughter at minimum. Shenemar, because that's the way creation happened. It says, Zachar u'nikeva bar'am. God created them, man and female, as Adam and Chava. Says the Gemara, what the implication of the Mishnah is, if a person has children, he doesn't have to worry about having more children, so about having, attempting to have more children. But it's only that the person can be batil, but not from being married, implying that you have to make an effort to stay married, even if you already have children. That supports Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, Kama banim, even if a person has many children, so they've fulfilled the mitzvah of Pirya v'Rivya, asur la'amod b'lo isha, they shouldn't be alone, shouldn't live without a wife. Shenemar lo tov hayot adam levado, because the pasuk doesn't qualify it. It says lo tov hayot adam levado. Of course, that's a pasuk way back in the beginning of Breshit, and so it's not connected necessarily to children. I mean, obviously those things are related, but even if a person is fulfilled and has the children they're supposed to have, they are still supposed to make an effort to be married. Ikadamri, now some say that the way you darshan our Mishnah, Ikadamri, hayesh lo banim batil mi pirya v'rivya batil nami mi isha. In fact, the Mishnah is telling you exactly that rule, that if you don't have children, lo yivatel adam mi pirya v'rivya, but if you did, you don't have to worry about being married, you don't have to worry about having children. Name it David Yifta Rav Nachman, that seems to go against Rav Nachman. Amar Shmuel, Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel. Says we're low. It's not a tiyufta because ein lo banim. All it's telling you is that in fact, if a person has no children, then they have to make an effort to marry a person who can bear them children, which means a certain age or a certain capability. Nosat isha bat banim, who can, the age or ability to bear children. But yesh lo banim, if he already has children, he should maybe still be married, but doesn't have to worry about marrying someone who can bear him children. Because there's a love bat banim, and why does it matter? Nafkamina lemkor sefer Torah b'shvil banim. There's a halacha, a very fascinating halacha, which we don't have here, that you're allowed, if a person has to get married and they can't afford to get married, they can sell a sefer Torah to make money to use that to get married. It's one of only two things you really can do that for. The other's to learn Torah. But he has a Sefer Torah. His father left him a Sefer Torah, whatever. He can sell a Sefer Torah to get $20,000, $30,000, whatever they cost, a lot of money, and use that in order to get married because there is a mitzvah. They want to learn this elsewhere. There's a mitzvah to be married, but that's only true if for the mitzvah period of a rivya. Right? I mean, you can't spend money, basically, money from a Sefer Torah to marry specifically a woman who can bear you children if you already have fulfilled the mitzvah of having children. So then you can't use that money for that. Continues the Gemara, how do we know this? Beit Shammai Omrim Shnei Zecharim, says the Gemara, Mai Tamaya de Beit Shammai. Mai Tamaya de Beit Shammai. What's the reason that Beit Shammai says two male children? Because Yalfina mi Moshe. He learns it out from Moshe. Remember, by Moshe, very famously and controversially, Moshe left his wife, basically, right? He left his wife. His brother and sister criticized him for that, but he had already had two sons. So presumably Moshe would not have done that unless he was already Mekayim Pirya v'Rivya. Of course, this is Code of Har Sinai, whatever, different issues. But he had two sons. D'chtiv b'nei Moshe Gershom ve'Eliezer. So he has two sons, and they're both men and male. And so therefore and then he left his wife. So you see that he already fulfilled the mitzvah of Pirya v'Rivya. Beit Hillel says, Yalpina mi briyato shalom. Beit Hillel, as he said in our Mishnah, we derive it from creation. It says in the Torah, Zachar nekeva baram. And that's the building blocks of creation. Beit Shammai, so why doesn't he agree? He says, well, in creation, if there's nobody before you, right, you have to have a male and a female in order to make more people. So that's an impossible situation. If there are two of one gender, there's not going to be more people. So that's called Ein Danin Efshar Mish'i Efshar. You can't learn a situation nowadays where there's many people in the world. So for each individual, if a person only has sons or only has daughters, they'll presumably find other people they can marry. But with Adam and Chava, there was no other people. So there was an Efshar situation. Says in Beit Hillel, Nami Lofimi Moshe. Now, Beit Hillel, why don't you learn from Moshe? Moshe should be good enough for you, right? Moshe had 2 sons, and then he left his wife. Amri Lacham, Beit Hillel would say to you that Moshe midatehu da'avad. Moshe did not do it according to a mitzvah. Moshe did it on his own assumption, basically. And other people are not like Moshe, and they shouldn't do it. The Tanya, in fact, the Braita says Shlosha Dvarim. We learn this in Shabbos. Shlosha Dvarim asam Moshe mida'ato. There are 3 things that Moshe did all on his own, without precedent in the Torah. And God ultimately showed that God agreed with us. What were the 3 things? First of all, Piresh min ha'isha. First of all, he separated from his wife. And second of all, Shiver luchot. He broke the luchot, which was not commanded to him, but ultimately Hashem agreed. And third, Hosif Yom Echad. He added 1 day to the days of Hagbalah, the days before they got the Torah at Har Sinai, which is why we brought this in Shabbos to discuss that in detail. It says the Braita, what are these 3 things? Piresh min ha'isha my darash. Why did Moshe make a decision that he should no longer sleep with his wife? Amar, because he said, look, by Har Sinai, Hashem told Bnei Yisrael to separate the Kidashtem. Kidashtem in that context means go away from your wife, right? Be Kadosh, B'hayom Machar, right? And it ended up meaning 3 days. But Ma Yisrael, now Bnei Yisrael at Har Sinai, Shlo Dibra Imam Shechina, Elefi Sha'ah. Right, God only spoke to Bnei Yisrael for 1 moment, for the time of Har Sinai, of the 10 Commandments. And Kavala Mizman, they knew when it was coming. And still, Amrat Torah al Tikshu al Isha, don't sleep with your wives. Ani, says Moshe, Shemiyuchad L'daber L'dibor, B'chol Shah B'Shah. I have to be prepared to talk to Hashem at any time. Hashem can come to me whenever. But Lo Kavala Lizman, God did not give me a specific time. That I'm basically in perpetual scenario of Bnei Yisrael, Bnei Har Sinai. I'm always ready to go to Har Sinai, and therefore I can never live with my wife, and that's why he no longer lived with her. And his schema dato datamakom, Hashem in fact agreed with him, even though he made this up on his own. Shenemar, because it says in Betchanan, when it describes after Har Sinai, that Moshe said to them, Lech emor lahem, Hashem told Moshe, go tell Bnei Yisrael, Shuvu lachem ba'ahalechem. Go back to your tents. And go back to your homes and to your partners, your spouses. Va'ata po amori mati. But you, Moshe, stay with me, implying that Moshe doesn't go back home. So therefore, Hashem was basically telling him at that point that he doesn't go back home. So that is 1. The second case was Shiveret HaLuchot. Moshe broke the Luchot. My darash. How did Moshe decide just on his own to break the Luchot? God didn't tell him to do that. Amar, because Moshe said, Pesach, the carbon Pesach, right? It's one of the 613 mitzvot. It's one of many. But Amrat Torah, there's a specific mitzvah, and of course, these were mitzvah before Har Sinai. It says, Kol ben nechar lo yochabo. Anyone who's a ben nechar should not eat the carbon Pesach. What's a ben nechar? So we learned in Psachim, remember, that ben nechar meant a person who doesn't follow mitzvot, a person who's a distant from Hashem. So if that's true about Karban Pesach, HaTorah Kula, if you're now talking about the Luchot, which carry within them the ideas of the entire Torah, the Yisrael Mumrim and Yisrael are rebelling because they built this Paraduma, right? They built this Egel HaZahav, Alachat Kama V'Kama, that should not get the Luchot. And that's why Moshe broke them. And his schema dato data makom, in fact, Hashem agreed, because it says about the Luchot, Asher Shibarta. It says that these were the Luchot that Asher Shibarta, that he broke. Now, I say Asher, just Asher Shibarta. So it says Rish Lakish, Amar Lev, Kadosh Baruch Hu Moshe, Yasher Kochacha Shibarta. Asher is Yasher. You should be praised. You should be strengthened for what you did, as we say, Yasher Koach to people. Hashem said it to Moshe, that Hashem agreed after the fact, of course, that Moshe was right to break the Luchot. So that's the second thing. And the third thing that Moshe did on his own was Hosif Yom Echad Mida'ato. Moshe added 1 day on his own. Remember, Hashem told Moshe that the Bnei Yisrael in front of Har Sinai, coming up to these days very soon, at the end of the Omer, that Bnei Yisrael should prepare Hayom u'Machar, and then I'm going to give the Torah. And Moshe added a third day, right? So my darash, on what basis did Moshe do that? Dichtiv, because it says, and now we are around a third of the way down in Samach Bet Amud Aleph, by the pasuk V'kidashtem. It says in the pasuk V'kidashtem, you should be holy Hayom u'Machar, today and tomorrow, right? So Moshe, let's just say it happened to be it was Wednesday, right? So Hayom u'Machar means Wednesday and Thursday. So Torah would have been given on Friday, right? The Moshe said to himself, Hayom kimachar. Hashem wants today to be like the next day, meaning Mam machar, just like the next day. Again, if it was Wednesday, it'd be Wednesday and Thursday. But Thursday leilo imo, it's the whole day. It's Thursday and the night before. Af hayom leilo imo. So today should also be with the night before, but it's the middle of the day on Wednesday, right? The laila da'idna nafakli. So from today, the night's already gone. Shmamina tre yumi lebar me'ha'idna. Hashem wants 2 days besides today. So if it was Wednesday, it's today, Thursday, and Friday, and the Torah was given on Shabbos. The schema dato datamakom, and in fact, that of course Hashem agreed. How did Hashem agree? Because Hashem didn't show up to give the Torah until the third day, right? So the lo shar yeshchina ad Shabbata. The Shekhinah did not come until Shabbos. Doesn't mean Shabbos here, it's just the seventh day, which also is Shabbos, but it didn't come until the seventh day. And of course, this is a topic of a lot of discussion in the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat about what day they got the Torah, the 6th or the 7th of Sivan. Tanya, now back to our Mishnah. So Hanan, you missed the Mishnah, but the Mishnah said that a person...
Like this felt like such a tangent from it.
It was a tangent. The Mishnah said that a person should not be mivatel, should not stop from fulfilling the mitzvah of Piryav Rivya, of procreating and having children, unless they have 2 children, according to Beit Shammai, 2 males. According to Beit Hillel, 1 male and 1 female. There's a Braita, though, that says different numbers. Tanya, one second. So just to clarify now this point, the Mishnah obviously does not say you have to control what gender your children are, right? The mitzvah of Piryav Rivya is not a mitzvah that ends. It's the same as Shabbos. It's not like you don't do Shabbos until you've done it twice. There's no concept of that, right? Piryav Rivya is an ongoing mitzvah. The question is, right, when so you're always fulfill the mitzvah at any point. The question is there a point where you can stop doing the mitzvah, right? Are you finished doing it? So obviously for things like Shabbos, there's no such thing, right? You keep Shabbos your whole life. But the question is, for a period of Arivia, is there a point where you could say, I fulfilled it, I'm done? So our Mishnah said that point is when we learn from Moshe Rabbeinu, that Moshe had 2 children and 2 sons, and then he left his wife. So you see from Moshe that you can do that after you've done this amount, you can stop doing the mitzvah, basically. Again, not true.
That you shouldn't use contraceptives until. Not
true about any other mitzvah. So that's the Mishnah. Rabbi Hillel says, "Azachar nikeva." We learn from creation. And Tanya, Rabbi Natan says, this is in a Tosefta, that Beit Shammai in fact does not say 2 sons, but Beit Shammai holds shnei zacharim u'shtei nikevot, 2 sons and 2 daughters, 4 children. And Beit Hillel says Zachar nikeva, 1 and 1. Amar Huna, my time in Rabbi Natan, leave with the Beit Shammai. What's the reason for Beit Shammai in this logic? Dichtiv, because it says by Adam and by Chava, that Tosef leledet, that she continued to give birth, et achiv, et hevel. So we darshan the extra, right? Because in achiv hevel, the et is extra to tell you there was also a daughter born with each of them. So Hevel had a twin sister and Cain had a twin sister, right? So that's 4. So Hevel v'achoto and Cain v'achoto. And then, of course, when unfortunately Hevel was killed by his brother Cain, it says that she had another child, and she calls the child Shet. Kishat li Elohim zera acher tachat Hevel ki hargo Cain. That God gave me another zera, implying that now I'm fulfilled, right? So in order to be fulfilled, to fulfill my obligation to procreate, I have to have 4 children, and I've now replaced the one that was missing. Rabbanan says she wasn't saying I fulfilled my mitzvah. She was praising Hashem, thanking God. It had nothing to do with fulfilling a mitzvah. So that is one version of Braita, that in fact Beit Shammai says you need 4 children. Tanya Irach, there's another Braita, also in the Tosefta, where Rabbi Natan says, Beit Shammai omrim zachar v'nekeva. Unlike our Mishnah, the Beit Shammai says 2 children, 1 male, 1 female. And Beit Hillel says, O zachar o nekeva. No, 1 child, either male or female. You just have to have 1 child to fulfill the mitzvah. Amar Rava, my time with Rabbi Natan, Aliba de Beit Hillel. What in the world is the reason for 1 child? But if you learn from Moshe, Moshe had 2 children, 2 sons. If you learn from Adam and Chava, they had. Sorry, if you learn not Adam and Chava, if you learn from creation, that's Adam and Chava, who were a male and a female. So where in the world would you get 1?
Could you argue that like prayer already implies multiple?
Like
in a plural?
Maybe. My time with Rabbi Natan, Aliba de Beit Hillel. So where do you get 1 from? Shenemar, because this is based on the pasuk in the Navi, which says Lo tohu bara, you were not created for nothing, meaning to have a world of emptiness. Lo shevet yatzara, you were created to populate the earth, right? The ha'avad lo shevet, as long as this person passes on his genetic or her genetic material to a next generation, they fulfill the obligation. It doesn't matter according to this reading whether it's a son or a daughter or 2 sons or any number. Of course, right, which it gets to some of the questions here, which is, of course, you could have 5 children and they only have 1 child, right? You could have 1 child who has many children. So it's not really a numbers game according to this. It's just passing on. If you have no children, then your genetic inheritance doesn't go anywhere. And so therefore,
right, but if you only have 1 child, you're not replacing. I mean,
it's true. So you could take 2. Nava had the same idea from the plural. You have to have replacement. Remember, replacement was a little bit different in those times because there wasn't a 1-to-1 ratio because many men married 2 women, right, or more women. So,
right.
You have to, the math's a little different when you start doing that. But either way, you're right. You have to have more than 1 to replace.
Right? The other thing is that there was 50% infant mortality. So you have to factor that in.
Well, you weren't going to ask the
Shammai might. What's that?
Your mother's going to ask that question.
Well, I mean, yeah, right. Well, that's maybe what Beit Shammai is saying, because there's 50% infant mortality. That's why you have to have 4. He's really agreeing with Beit Hillel.
Okay. Itzmar. Now, says the Gemara, before we get to the question of children who die, what if you had children, a person is a convert? Person has children when they're a non-Jew and they convert. So have they fulfilled the mitzvah of Pirya v'Rivya or not? Fascinating question. Rabbi Yochanan says, Omer, Nav is nodding, Kiyem Pirya v'Rivya. This person has fulfilled their mitzvah. Reish Lakish says, Lo Kiyem Pirya v'Rivya. They have not. Rabbi Yochanan, Omer, Kiyem Pirya v'Rivya, Dahavile. The guy had children, right? There's no way to argue with that. He's the father. Reish Lakish, Omer, Lo Kiyem Pirya v'Rivya, because the rule is, He's a new person. He's born again. That's the wrong phrase, right? He's a new person. So it's as if he never had children. And in fact, Azul Tamayo, they have the exact same argument in another context about the Itmar. Let's say a non-Jew has children and then he converts, Nitgayer. Rabbi Yochanan Omer ein lo b'chor l'nachala. His next child is born, let's say it's a male, right, is not going to be his firstborn because it's not his firstborn. Dahavila, he had Rashid don't know, right? He already had children. It's not like he didn't have any children. So this person is not considered a Bechor, meaning he doesn't get double portion. He doesn't inherit the way a Bechor does, right? There's no concept of Bechor if you already have children.
The children,
Reish Lakish said,
the children converted too?
No.
Or just you?
No, just you. The children have nothing to do. It's very clear. Well, it's not very clear, but the halacha is that the children convert. They're not related to you in that for some ways. Right, we had a discussion before about whether znut is a problem. Right, that's a whole different discussion. Reish Lakish says yesh lo b'chor l'nachala. That no, he does have a b'chor l'nachala, meaning his next son who's born is going to be his firstborn son. Why? Because a ger is a new person, so he's like he never had children. It says the Gemara, of course, why in the world would Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish have to have the same argument about the same thing twice? Sricha. Obviously, we need to argue in both cases. If they'd only argued in the first case, where the question was regarding mitzvah of Pirya v'Rivya, a person converted, does he need to have more children? I would have thought that Rabbi Yochanan, that he doesn't need to have more children. When he was non-Jewish, Non-Jews also are mitzvah. Remember, it's a bracha in the Torah. It's not one of the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach, but it is certainly a bracha to Adam and Chava, and that they should have children. So Pirya v'Rivya applies to non-Jews. So then might be why he already fulfilled it. Avalini nachala, we always consider there's no rules of nachala, none of the rules of double inheritance and nachala banim and napanot, none of that applies to non-Jews. So elin nachala delavei nachala ninu emamot le'derish lakish, that when he converts, he's a new person. V'yitmar b'han, if you had only argued about the second case of nachala, of inheritance, I would have thought that's where Rish Lakish says he's like a new person. Maybe by Perya v'Rivya emamot le'Rabbi Yochanan, and therefore tzricha, we have to have both cases. So that's why we need both cases. Now, Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan asked Rish Lakish from a pasuk in the Navi, in Melachim. It says in the end of Melachim bet, Ba'etahi, at that time, Shalach Beradach Baladan, Ben Baladan, Melech Bavel, to destroy, unfortunately, right? So but here the Torah is clearly calling someone the son of someone else when they're not Jewish. So how could you say that if you're not Jewish, you don't have any Pirya v'Rivya, because a child is not considered to be connected to you in that way? It's clearly the case, it's the child, Baladan, Ben Baladan. Amarle said, Rish Lakish back to Rabbi Yochanan, I never said that non-Jews are not connected to their children. When they're non-Jews, then of course they have a connection to each other. He's his father. But Nitzgairu, all I'm saying is that if the father converts, he becomes a new person. And then let lechayis, he's no longer connected. So he can't say you fulfilled your mitzvah of pru'ervu if you're not connected to that child. Amar Rav, now says Rav, Hakol Modim be'eved. Now everybody agrees by a slave that if they have a child, she'ein lechayis, they're not considered to be connected to that child because they're really an employee of their master, and the children they have belong to their master also. But this is an Eved Kanani, right? Not an Eved for sure, but an Eved Kanani. She'ein lechayis. Ichtiv, because it says by Eliezer, the Eved of Abraham, Shavu lechem po im hachamor. So he said, sit here with the chamor, and we say im, meaning he's domel chamor, meaning for these halachot, he's like an animal. He doesn't even have halachot of a independent person. Meitves is where, how could that be? It says earlier in Navi and Shmuel by Mephibosheth, by the slave of the son of Shaul. It says L'tziva, who was an Eved Kanani, Chamisha asar banim asrim avadim. He had his own 15 sons and 20 slaves. So clearly you see that a slave can have sons. That's not Amar Bacha Bar Yaakov. That's not telling you a slave can have sons, but so can an animal. Meaning there's nothing about that tells you they're connected. It's Kapar ben Bakar, right? You talk about a par, the child of a Bakar. It doesn't mean that you consider that to be a human or a regular filial relationship.
Legally.
What?
Just legally.
Well, legally, but also for responsibility of populating the earth, meaning who gets credit basically for that child, right? So if you, depending on what you call credit.
Eved is not chayav to fulfill the mitzvah, right?
Yeah, sure, but let's say he then converted, right? So that's right, which if you free him. Well, the question is, does he have to do pru'ervu? So what we're saying, according to this, is that even if you hold that a non-Jew who has a child fulfilled the mitzvah, an Eved has not fulfilled the mitzvah. When he converts.
When he is an Eved.
Right. Once he converts, he has to do it again.
Right. I mean, he wasn't chayav when Eved.
Sure. But the point is that once he converts, he is chayav. And are the children he had before going to fulfill it? We're saying we don't consider those children to be connected to him any more than, obviously they're biologically connected to him, like animals biologically connected to its parent. But we don't consider that fulfillment of him because he gets sort of no credit for them. It's not considered his children. It's considered belonging to his owner.
Wait, but then does that fulfill the owner's mitzvah forever?
No, it's a good question, but no.
What's the question?
Shani hatam v'yachsinu b'shemayo u'b'shma davor machal mefarish. This is where this is also a little different because by the earlier case of the king, it referred to him and the name of his father, right? It didn't say he was his son. He said he was a son, the son of someone else. And there are those who say that there's another question where you see a non-Jew getting yichus, because yachsinu b'duchta achrini, there's yichus in another place, ba'avun u'ba'ava da'avun, u'abadavun. There's a case where it's miyuchas, 2 generations. And what's that? Tichtiv, vayishachem hamelech asa, Asa sent messengers, El ben Hadad, who was the king of, I think, Ashur, Ben Tavrimon, Aram, Ben Tavrimon, Ben Chazion, Melech Aram. So you see there a non-Jew who's Muchas, his father and his grandfather. So you see, Hayoshev ben Damascus, you clearly see that there is such a connection by a non-Jew, according to that opinion, Limor. Now, 4 lines from the bottom, Hanan's question. Itmar, he said, Hayulo banim v'met, right? Let's say, it's an incredible Gemara. You're not going to hear something like this for a long time. You ready?
He's in 24,000 boys.
No. Hayulo banim v'met. This is, you can get Kabbalah all night long for this. Let's say a person had children and they died, right? Whatever the children are, according to Beit Shammai, 2 sons, according to Hillel, son and a daughter, according to maybe 4, whatever it is. But one or all of them died, right? So are you fulfilled in Piryav Rivya? So Ravuna Omer Kiyem Piryav Rivya. Yeah, you had your children. I mean, you did the mitzvah, right? The fact that it didn't work, it's like, I don't know, you plant something, you do it, you did what you're supposed to do. If Yochanan Omer Lo Kiyem, which is again preposterous if you think of this as a regular mitzvah, right? Because how could it be? You did the mitzvah, you had the children. The fact that they didn't live, it doesn't change the way that you did the mitzvah. But according, of course, if you're thinking about it not as doing the mitzvah is constant. The question is, have you been, relieved of doing the mitzvah? You're only relieved of doing the mitzvah if you've created something that's living.
Does it depend how old they were?
No, depends on how old you are, because you might not be able to have
It
children.
depends how old they were. Like if they're less than 30 days, they're not considered.
No. Like not according to this. According to this, it doesn't depend at all.
But you could see why it might matter, if
So I guess what you're saying is it's true that probably even according to the opinion that this does count, if they were less than 30 and we don't consider them to be people, we don't say shiva, all those,
right.
We wouldn't even count for that, right? If they were born ill as that case.
Right. Yeah.
What's the reason? So this reason is going to blow you out of the water, right? Funa Amar Kiyeh. Funa says it doesn't matter that the person had children and they died. He fulfilled the mitzvah of Piryav and Rivya. Do you know why? Shmishum Rabbi Asi. The Amar Rabbi Asi, Ein ben David ba ad sheyichalu kol neshamot shabeguf. Mashiach is not going to come until all of the souls that are in the guf. Now Rashi explains the guf refers to a metaphysical place where all the neshamot reside, right? A neshama needs a body. And so there's a place, again, obviously you're not going to find this place while walking, but there's a place which we call the guf, right? The world's body, so to speak, where all of the souls that are meant to be in creation exist. And Mashiach is not going to come until every one of those souls has had an opportunity to manifest itself on this world. And so if a person has a child and that child dies, they fulfilled that because they got one neshama out of the guf into the world. Essentially, it's like, right? You can see where there's a lot of Kabbalistic discussions here. But this is a Gemara, though, just to be clear. But Shenemar, Kim Ruach Milefanai Yatov, anyways, it's based on a pasuk in Yeshayahu, that there is a finite amount of neshamot, and it could be that some of them live over and over, right? You can have all kinds of permutations of this, right? So, because if you don't fulfill everything, or let's say there's a neshama that doesn't do what it's supposed to do, but the point that he's making lahalacha lamasa, not we don't paskin this way, is that if a person has a child, they fulfilled the obligation of transferring a neshama into a body. And if that person dies, it doesn't matter. They did their thing. The neshama was done. And so that gets the world one step closer to where it's supposed to be. Yeah, anyways,
usually we don't interpret Yemot Mashiach as like the end of, here, like there's the bill, nobody else born because, they used up all the neshamot or something.
I agree. It's a very strange concept.
Very strange, yeah.
Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan, which is how we paskin, Amar, lo kiyem Piryav Rivya, because Piryav Rivya is about populating the earth. L'shevet yitzara b'ginam v'aleka. The whole point is that you preserve population on the earth. If the kid doesn't live, then they don't count for this purpose. And so you're not fulfilling your mitzvah. Meitve asked the Gemara, what about the following bright? The Breita says, turn the page to Samach Bet Amud Bet. B'nei banim hareim kibanim. That if you're talking about children, grandchildren count like children, which we think that means Now, let's say a person has two children, but one of them dies. As long as that child had another child, that counts. They fulfilled the mitzvah per yav rivya. Because even though their two children are not alive, they have a grandchild, right? And so since they have a grandchild, that's enough, which implies, according to Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan says this supports me, that the only way it works is if you have a grandchild. But if your child died, if the person's child died and didn't have a grandchild, then they wouldn't count, right? It says, well, not necessarily. Kitanya hi lahashlim. That's referring to, let's say a person didn't have two children or didn't have four children or didn't have two male children. Then their grandchildren can count for them. Meaning they can have a child, who's a girl, let's say, and then that child can have a boy, and that would count as the son.
So I have to have sons for you.
Meitvei says the Gemara, what about the following brayta? It says, B'nei banim areim kibanim. It says in this brayta that grandchildren are like children, and it says in this brayta clearly, Meitechamem, if one of the children died, Oshanim saris. This is even further. The person has two children, but one of them can't have their own children. They don't count, according to this brayta. Lo kiyem kiryav rivya tiyufta d'Ravuna tiyufta. Because according to this version, again, it's not consistent internally, but according to this version, the whole point is procreation, is population of the earth. And so there's a mitzvah period of rivya not to have two children. If a person has 5 children and they get killed in a war, they have to keep having more children, right? You're not done with the mitzvah just because you had the children. The point is, as long as a person's alive and they can, right? Obviously there are limitations, and they can, there's a mitzvah to have more children unless they have, according to Beit Shammai 2, according to Beit Hillel 2, a boy and a girl, whatever it may be. Obviously, practically speaking, there are many, 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 many great people who didn't fulfill this, right? So how they do that, like so it's not, just to be clear, this is not the only value in the world, right? There are situations where someone's married and the person can't have a child. Doesn't mean they necessarily need to do something about it, or whatever the situation is. There are many such situations.
But use this logic, then if you had children before you converted, you should be you did populate the earth. So
that's Rabbi Yochanan says that, but Reish Lakish says is that you're not connected to those people, so you don't really get. It's like you're starting over.
But they still exist. They're still populating the world. That's
what Rabbi Yochanan says. That's what he said. He agrees.
But those kids are not Jewish.
Doesn't matter. The Provud, according to this, is not about Jewish souls. Right?
It's about population.
Right.
Continues the Gemara, 4 lines from the top. That grandchildren are like children. Again, we said it's for this purpose, that you can fill it up. You can be yotze your responsibility. Savar Abai Lameimar. Abai thought this meant brother back to the back. If your son has a son, or your daughter has a daughter, and even if the son dies or something, that grandson counts. The Kolshkin brother Barta. Tos is not clear why in the world should be Kolshkin. A son for a daughter. Aval Barta the brother. But if it's a daughter for a son, it doesn't count. Amalei Rava. No, I completely disagree. L'shevet yitzara ba'ika. Right. The point is, you just need to have the world populated. So it doesn't matter whether it's a boy or it's a girl. Again, it's not clear then why you would, in the beginning, even need to have a son and a daughter. Tikuli amamia tre michadlo. But everybody seems to agree that, and again, this doesn't always add up, that you can't have one child who has 2 grandchildren. You're not fulfilling your mitzvah. Let's say a person has a son or a daughter. Let's say a daughter, and they have a son, and that daughter has a son and a daughter. Right? They don't fulfill their mitzvah. They have to keep trying to do their mitzvah. Why not? Right? So clearly from this, there's a couple of details here. One is l'shevet, which is to have a lot of people. But the other might be that, I don't know, that it's better if they come from multiple people. I don't know what the logic would be. But there's some limud that you have to have children from 2 different sources, meaning 2 children. And in this case, a boy and a girl, or according to Beit Hillel. But that seems to be the halacha. That trei michad lo. Says Gemara, is that true? Rav Sheshet had a daughter, Rashi says, I think. And he then, I think his wife died, and he didn't have any more children. He didn't get married again. And the Chachamim kept coming to him and saying to him, Nasiv itita v'olibni. You got to go and marry a woman so you can have more children. Amrulun, he said, no. I've got grandchildren. B'nei barti b'neinin. My daughter's children are my own sons. So clearly he's implying that even though he only has 1 daughter, as long as she's got multiple children, I guess I can fulfill the mitzvah. So says well, he was just saying that. It's not true halacha. Hatam dechuye kamad chilu. He was just trying to get them to stop bothering him. Rav Sheshet, in fact, he couldn't have children because of, what's the word I'm looking for?
Sterile.
Sterile.
Sterile. Thank you. That was the word. I was saying infertile, but sterile. And that's because the Gemara had a story elsewhere at Pirkei Rav Huna that the Rav Huna used to give very, very long drashot. And he was embarrassed to go out, and so he had to hold in his urine.
Oh,
Urinary tract infections, and he got scarring, and he was sterile.
He was also blind.
He was also blind.
Sheshet.
Rav Sheshet was blind, and he was
Sheshet was blind, yeah.
but that's weird. So really, he couldn't have children. So that's why he didn't get married again, because he couldn't fulfill the mitzvah. But he didn't want to say that, so he said, "Oh, my daughter has kids." Amar le Rava, the
next time the rabbi goes on too long.
What?
I'm going to quote this next time the rabbi goes on too long.
Amar le Rava, the Rava bar Mari. How do we know this? This is a very famous saying that everybody knows. B'nei banim areim kibanim. That grandchildren are like your own children. What's the source for that? Ilema mi tichtiv. Well, maybe it's based on the pasuk that we have by what's his name? Lavan. Thank you. Habanot benotai, babanim banai. Right? He says when Yaakov is running away with his lots. Lavan's daughters, right? Rachel and Leah. He says, "These are my sons. These are my daughters." We don't know who the daughters are, but anyways, they're my daughters. Ella me'ata. Then the next words he says are hatzon sonai. Doesn't mean he's not the father of the son, right? Nachanami doesn't mean that. Ella means to kanit minai. You got it from me, right? I'm the source of your sheep that you then had. I'm the source of your grandchildren because I'm the father of your wives. Nachanami to kanit minai. El mihach. It says, it's a fascinating pasuk in Divrei Yamim. It says, "Va'acher." Afterwards, Ba Chetzron al bat Machir avi Gilad. Chetzron married the daughter of Machir, who's from Menashe. Remember, right? Machir ben Menashe, the father of Gilad. The Telid lo at Seguv, and a child named Seguv. And then elsewhere it says, "D'chtiv mani Machir yardu mechokikim." Right from Seguv, from Machir. Sorry, they descended. People were mechokikim. Right? Chokikim literally means people who carve, right? Who carve things out. And but we know from elsewhere that Yehuda mechokikim, right? That Yehuda were the ones who were mechokikim. So how can Menashe's sons be mechokikim if they have to be from Yehuda? It must be that the mother was from Yehuda, right? So the father is from Menashe, he married the mother from Yehuda, and they're called the children of Yehuda, even though they come ultimately from Menashe. So you see that grandchildren are considered to be children. Now, says the Gemara, final part we're going to do tonight, is that our Mishnah, which says that a person is patur from Pirya v'Rivya after they have X number of children, that is matnitan delok Reb Yeshua. That goes against Reb Yeshua. The Tanya Reb Yeshua Omer, there's no stopping. There's no time where a person should stop trying to have more children if they're, whatever circumstances are. Nasa Adam Isha b'yalduto. If a person gets married when they're young and they have a family and for whatever reason, it's whatever happens, they should do it again. Nisa Isha b'ziknuto. They should get married again when they're elderly. Hayulo banim b'yalduto. If they have children when they're young, even if they're again all alive, all successful, keep going. Hayulo banim b'ziknuto. Shenemar, based on the pasuk in Kohelet, which says, "Baboker zarad zaracha," in the morning of your life, when you're young, plant your seeds. Ula erev, but when you get old, and this is how we're dashing it, in the evening of the life, al tanach yadecha. Don't stop. Don't lay your hand up. Don't say, "I've done it. It's time to retire." Ki eincha yodea eze yachshiv. You don't know which one's going to end up being successful. You have no idea which one ultimately. Of course, people think they're the most successful thing, and who knows? A generation or two later, it may not be. You don't know if it's hazeh or zeh. Again, this is still a pasuk in Kohelet. Or in Shneim Ke'achad Tovim, look, if they work together, that's great. So you should never stop, which is not what our Mishnah said. Our Mishnah said there's a point when you can stop.
And you don't know which children will.
Well, again, it depends on what your value is, what you're looking for here. But yeah, you don't know which ones will be the ones who populate the world or succeed or grow the world or whatever the goal is, whatever your goal. I mean, Kohelet is not talking specifically about Pirya v'Rivya, right? Whatever a person's objective to accomplish is, don't stop and say, "I've done it. I fulfilled my thing." If you can keep doing it, keep doing it. Obviously, if you can't, you can't, right? If it's not functional, if it's not feasible, if it's not practical, there's all kinds of other considerations. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Rabbi Akiva made this all about Torah. Rabbi Akiva is good at doing that. And he said, Lamad Torah b'yalduto, you might be an expert. You learned Torah when you were a kid. You went to the best high school in Riverdale, right? But don't stop. Yomad Torah b'ziknuto. Keep learning Torah. Keep learning Torah as you get older, because you never know. Maybe you think you know a lot of things, you think etc. But you get a new perspective. And it's not just true about Torah, right? It's true about any job or thing. You could keep learning. Hayulo tamidim b'yalduto. You have many students when you're young. Again, Yulo Talmidim Ziknuto. Shenemar B'Buker Zaret Tzarech L'Erev Al Tanach Yedech. Amr, they said, obviously very famous to all of us. Shneim Asar Elef Zugim Talmidim Hayulo Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva had this tremendous, educator, and he had 12,000 pairs of students in his school's network. Megivat an Antiparis. I don't know where either of these places are, but it's from far away to far away, let's say, right? So his yeshivot stretched from one side of the empire to the other. And there were thousands and thousands of people who were students of Rabbi Akiva, right, in his network. The kulan meitu b'perek echad, they all died in one time period. Mipnei, it must have been a very infectious disease. Mipnei shelo nagu kavod zel lezeh, because they did not treat each other with respect. And unfortunately, the whole holam shamim, the world of Torah was desolate. That right, there was no one who remembered all the knowledge, all the years of study was all wiped out. Ad sheba Rabbi Akiva, who must have been an old person by this point, didn't give up. He didn't stop. He came Eitzel Rabbeinu Shebedarom V'shana Lahem. He went to Rabbeinu Shebedarom, who presumably were already rabbis, but he taught them as well. And they were Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, it was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua. And because of that, Haim Hamidu Torah Oto Sha'ah, right? They're the ones who preserved Torah for that whole time period. So Rabbi Akiva didn't give up. He kept persisting. And that's, of course, the lesson. One of the lessons of Sirah is that you got to keep going, right? Keep trying. Tana, and in fact, the Braita says, Kulam Mitumi Pesach HaNatzar. They all died in this time period. This is a little tricky with Lag Bomer, because it doesn't say anything about Lag Bomer here, right? But they all died from Pesach to Atzeret, from the time between Pesach to Matan Torah. And Amr Chama Bar Abba, became Rabbi Chia Bar Avin, Kulam Mitu Mitara'ah. They all died a miserable death. And Maihi Amr Nachman Askara. This is the death of Askara, which we don't really translate, but it means something about choking or, there's also an intestinal part of it. There's different illnesses that we talk about, but, not able to breathe and just a very, very painful and miserable death.
Actually, it says it's diphtheria.
Yeah, so people say diphtheria, but the problem with diphtheria is that I don't think it has an intestinal component to it.
Well, it's an inflammation of the throat that begins in the digestive tract.
Right, that's what Rashi says.
Yeah.
I don't really remember that much about diphtheria, thankfully. It's a very rare disease. It's like, I think you have this tremendous thirst for water is one of the symptoms, but either way, we get these, we're vaccinated against diphtheria, thankfully. So, but I think it's also a toxin that's probably not that common anymore. Either way, it's some illness that they had that was terrible. Amr Matna halacha Rabbi Yeshua. It says Rav Matna, we don't seem to pass in this way, but it says Rav Matna halacha is like Rabbi Yeshua, that you should never stop the effort to keep having children. Amr Tanchan Amr B'Chanilai. Let's continue a little bit more. It says Tanchan call Adam she'in lo isha, anyone who's not married, sharoy, or doesn't have a spouse, sharoy below simcha. They are living without joy, below bracha, below tova, not brachot or tovot. And what's that based on psukim? Below simcha dichtiv, it says samachta atov beitecha. It says by chagim, right? Simcha, you and your family, implying there's more simcha when it's with beitecha. Below bracha dichtiv laniach bracha al beitecha. It talks about a house again, which is a family or spouse, when it refers to bracha. Below tova dichtiv, of course, the first pasuk that we quoted earlier today. Lo tov hayot adam levado, that they should not. It's not tov for a person to be alone. And the Marava Amri, in Marava in the west, in Eretz Yisrael, they said also below Torah, below Chama. Without Torah, without a Choma, it's not clear what Choma means. Let's read the Gemara. Below Torah means dichtiv, because it says in the pasuk, Ha'im ein ezrati bi. If you don't have someone to help you, the Toshia nidcha mimeni, you will be far away from me, right? So if you don't have someone to assist you, which is what we're putting this position in, then you'll be far away from Hashem. And below Chama dichtiv, or not from Hashem, from Torah. Below Chama dichtiv nekeva sovev gaver. And in this pasuk is a very famous pasuk in Yirmiyahu, right? And the nekeva, a woman encircles and surrounds and supports and protects her husband. And so without that relationship, the man is missing the wall of protection. Should we stop here, or we should do one more line? Yeah, let's do one more. I'll just do one more. Rava bar Ula Omer b'lo shalom, also without peace, tichtiv yadata ki shalom ohalecha, that there's peace that comes with your ohel, again, which always refers to marriage, to a house. Upakarata navecha lo techata, they will visit or they will challenge your place of dwelling, and you will not sin. And we think we should stop here because this gets into a whole new halacha. So,
Thank you, Lily.
last wide line. Yeah. So tomorrow's a tremendous amount of agadata about marriage and more things, but it's just a fascinating thing that when you talk about, we talk about Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim, right? The context here is, of course, Rabbi Akiva, that even though Rabbi Akiva, I mean, there's a sadness about them dying, but the context of our Gemara is that Rabbi Akiva's life work was devastated, but he didn't stop, right? So that in some ways, the message is that don't give up, keep trying day after day. And even if you think you've succeeded, keep going, right? Meaning if you have many Talmidim, and Rabbi Akiva's case, he had many Talmidim, but he lost them all. And then he started over again. So Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov. Thank you,
What's
Lily.
up?
Next Shabbat.
Shabbat shalom.
Bye, Nava. Shavua Tov.